Thank you very much. I'm Gary Johnson, president of the Chicago History Museum, and with us today is our guest author, Alison Owings. Her latest book is Indian Voices, Listening to Native Americans. In her book, we meet a wide array of Native people, and we hear them discussing their own lives. So, Alison, please begin the conversation.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you also to the Chicago Lit Fest. I'm really happy to be here. I think that I wrote this book initially because I was so appalled by the ignorance of non-Native people about Native people, including myself. And I therefore set out to find what I could to help de-stereotype what I find is really a bad problem. It's been a bad problem for centuries, and it continues today. And initially, my idea was, well, I will just talk to a few Native people and find out what they had to say about their own lives. And then the book became stronger and stronger, really far-reaching. And I ended up interviewing the Passamaquoddies of Maine to the last chapter is a Hawaiian chanter. And my object at the time was to de-stereotype people, thinking that this would be helpful because Native Americans, in my opinion, are still harmed by the stereotypes about them. But on the other hand, the book also became sort of an extended family reunion for Native people who sometimes might live in one part of the country, like here in Chicago, and maybe not know about Native people in another part of the country. So that was kind of a trick, actually, in the writing, to write for people who knew nothing about Native people, and then to write for Native people who already knew a lot, certainly about themselves.
Well, yeah, you talk about different individuals. We want to hear from those individuals. Why don't we start with someone who lives right here in Chicago, Ansel Dion, who works at Chicago's American Indian Center.
Okay. The reason I interviewed Ansel is that in my early research, and I say research loosely, I knew so little that I was just reading anything I could, I learned that about 3/4 of Native people, 2/3 to 3/4 of Native people live off reservation, and including a group of people generally termed urban Indians. And so that quest to talk to an urban Indian led me to the Chicago American Indian Center and to this really wonderful guy, Ansel, who is a cultural coordinator there. He's a volunteer there at this point. And I'm going to read you a little bit about what he said to some second graders that he was introducing to Native culture, because they didn't know anything about Native people either. He says, once your teachers told you you were going to come here to the American Indian Center, how many of you expected to see an old man with long hair, probably braided, with a big headdress, wearing a leather outfit, and saying, "How, kids?" How many expected to see that? Be truthful. A few hands rose slowly. For those who have raised their hand and the ones that haven't, are you disappointed in seeing me the way I am now? No child moved. The reason I ask is, this is who we are, okay? We're ordinary people. We wear ordinary clothing. We are not the people you see in cartoons, you see on movies, you see on TV, what you might read about or what people might say about us. We are not these people. Indians, we go to school, we go to work. You might have met an Indian teacher in your school. You might have an Indian principal. You might know an Indian cop, Indian judge, Indian lawyer. This is who we are, and that's who we want to be, okay? Receiving enough nods to satisfy himself, Ansel picked up his hand drum, began beating it, then stopped. What does the beat remind them of? A child responded immediately. A heartbeat. Ansel praised him. One place you hear drums, he continued, is at a powwow. He asked who knows what a powwow is, told everyone they had really good guesses, then answered the question himself. It's a celebration where some of us Indians, we sing and we dance. We also make new friends and renew old friendships. A powwow is made up of 4 circles. The very first circle you'll see at a powwow is the drum. It represents a heartbeat. The heartbeat of the powwow, the heartbeat of Mother Earth, also the heartbeat of her children, which is all of us in this room and outside this room. Without this heartbeat, there will be no powwow.
So there we are right away. There's an individual who lives in this very city who, if you saw on the street, it may not occur to you that you're seeing a Native American. But when you scratch the surface and talk to that individual, you learn about his own culture. So we're not in the world of either or. This book is not about either or. But with regard to Ansel Dion, let me ask you about something else. My understanding is one of the reasons why he wore ordinary clothing in the museum center setting was because of certain of the individuals who came who might have a secret.
Well, that's part of it. He never said, and some of you might be a Native child or an Indian child too, he never said that because he was the only Native child in his high school. And he was discriminated against a lot. Kids made fun of him. This is a story of many Native people who live in a non-Native setting. So he tried very hard to not to put any children on the spot in case they were Indian, and maybe wanted to come up to him privately afterwards and tell them, and that happened often. But he said that also the reason he wore ordinary clothing was just to show that that this is how people dress. This is how Native people dress generally. They dress like everybody else. I made a joke in the book. I said they don't usually wear feathers, especially not on casual Fridays.
Well, we're laughing now, and I have to say that one of the most striking points in the book is made beginning with the very cover. When you look at the cover of Indian Voices, you see a whole group of people with some of the biggest smiles you'll ever see. And it may not be a stereotype to think of Native Americans as laughing and smiling, but the fact is that humor is something that is shot right through almost every chapter of the book.
Mm-hmm. I didn't realize when I started this book how funny Native people are and how many jokes they make on themselves, on other people. There's a whole string of books of jokes, including, for instance, what are the 10 things you say when you meet a white person? And and the last one is, may I touch your hair? So they are very, very funny. Ansel himself is pretty funny. I met him in November, which is a Native American Awareness Month, and Ansel refers to it as Rented Indian Month. And he calls himself the Rented Indian.
Who was it who referred to the definition of a Native American family? Four.
It's an old joke. It's an old Native joke. How many people are there in a typical Native American family? The answer is 5. A father, a mother, 2 children, and an anthropologist.
So there's a lot of humor. A lot of it is unexpected. But when you stand back and you ask, why am I surprised there's so much humor? The reason why someone who's not part of that culture might ask is you don't think of it on the outside as a culture that has much to laugh about. We focus on the difficulties that Native Americans have. So is this humor in spite of those difficulties, or is it woven into the culture itself?
I think it's both. And I think Native Americans are not the only people to have gallows humor about their situations. So part of it's gallows humor. But part of it, I could be way off here, but Native Americans are American Americans too. And America, in general, I think, is a humorous country often. I mean, that's what people say, that's the reputation of Americans in other countries, that we're funny. So why wouldn't Native Americans be funny too? But some are just hysterical. This one woman in Yakima I interviewed, oh, she's so funny. Every time I tell her a joke, she's already heard it. She's asked, have you lived on the reservation your whole life? And she'll say, not yet. I mean, it's just a takeoff on other jokes. But in general, I found that Native people laugh at each other, certainly at non-Native people, and at some of these assumptions, and sometimes they just get absolutely outraged.